No one in the village could remember a single day when her hair was short. It trailed behind her like a shadow that refused to leave, thick and dark, coiled with years no one could count. Children stared. Elders frowned. Strangers stopped walking when she passed. Some swore it moved even when there was no wind. Others whispered that it carried a weight no human should bear. She never hid it. She never decorated it. And she never explained it. On market days, her hair brushed the red earth as she walked. Dust clung to it. So did silence. Women pulled their children closer. Men lowered their voices. Someone once reached out with scissors, then froze, as if something unseen stood between the blade and her body. There were rumors, of course. That her hair was a promise. That it was a punishment. That cutting it would wake something that should remain asleep. But the most disturbing part wasn't how long her hair was. It was her face. Calm. Still. Unafraid. As if she already knew what everyone else was too scared to ask. Because whatever kept her from cutting her hair was more powerful than shame, fear, or tradition. And the village would soon learn that some things grow for a reason. In the mornings, the village woke the same way it always had. Roosters cried before the sun fully rose. Smoke curled gently from cooking fires as women stirred porridge in clay pots. Barefoot children ran through narrow paths, laughter cutting through the cool air. The earth was red and warm, packed hard by generations of footsteps that knew exactly where to go without thinking. Nothing about the village felt cursed. Nothing felt wrong. The river still flowed at the edge of the fields, carrying reflections of the sky. Farmers still bent over their crops, murmuring prayers to the soil. Elders still gathered beneath the old acacia tree, arguing softly about stories they had told each other for decades. Life moved in circles here, predictable, human, steady. And in that rhythm, she moved quietly among them. She rose early like the others. She fetched water without complaint. She greeted people with a nod, sometimes a faint smile, never lingering long enough to invite conversation. When someone was sick, she came with herbs. When a child fell, she helped them up, brushing dirt from their knees with careful hands. If you watched only her actions, you would think she was ordinary. But no one ever watched only her actions. Her hair was always there, thick, heavy, dark against her back. Sometimes braided loosely, sometimes hanging free, but never hidden. It swayed when she walked, brushed the ground when she bent, gathered dust and sunlight alike. Yet she treated it as if it were nothing special, as if it required no attention at all. That unsettled people more than the hair itself. In a village where women cut their hair to mark seasons of life, marriage, mourning, renewal, hers remained unchanged. While others marked time with blades and rituals, she seemed untouched by years. Not frozen, not young, but steady, as if time moved around her instead of through her. Still, the days passed peacefully. At midday, the heat settled over the village like a blanket. People rested in shade, chewing on roasted corn, listening to distant goats bleat. Someone always played a drum somewhere, soft and unhurried. The world felt slow, almost gentle. And she was there, sitting apart but not alone. Children were the only ones unafraid of her. They sat nearby, curious rather than cautious, watching her fingers trace patterns in the dust. Sometimes she told them stories, not grand ones, not frightening ones, but small stories about rivers, birds, and things that grow unseen beneath the ground. She never mentioned her hair. She never mentioned herself. The adults noticed everything. They noticed how she never joined celebrations fully, always stepping back before the dancing began. They noticed how she left gatherings before sunset. They noticed how her eyes sometimes lingered on the horizon, as if listening for something no one else could hear. Yet no one confronted her. Not because they didn't want to, but because nothing had happened yet. No illness followed her steps. No crops failed when she passed. No child cried after she spoke. The village had no proof, only discomfort. And discomfort, on its own, is easy to live with. So life continued. But beneath the calm routines, something subtle began to shift. People started avoiding sitting too close to her. Conversations lowered when she approached. Mothers called their children back sooner than before. It was unspoken, almost polite, but it was there. Normal life was still normal. Only now, It bent slightly around her presence. And though no one said it aloud, a quiet question settled into the village like dust after a long walk. How long could something so different exist before it demanded an answer? No one in the village could say when she had first arrived. Some believed she had always been there, simply unnoticed until her hair grew too long to ignore. Others claimed she came during a dry season many years ago, walking in alone from the east, carrying nothing but a small cloth bundle and a silence that felt older than her face. Every version of the story ended the same way. No one remembered her speaking about herself. Her name, when spoken, was said softly. Not out of respect exactly, but caution. She lived in a small mud house at the edge of the village, where the paths thinned and the grasses grew taller. There were no decorations on her walls, no symbols carved into her door. Just a sleeping mat, a clay bowl, and bundles of dried herbs hanging from the ceiling. It was the home of someone prepared to leave at any moment, or someone who had already left something behind. Each morning, she swept the ground in front of her door with slow, deliberate strokes. When people passed, she greeted them first. Always. Even those who avoided her eyes. Her voice, when she used it, was gentle and careful, as if words themselves could break if handled too roughly. But she never spoke about her hair. When asked, she only smiled faintly and changed the subject. If pressed, she would say, "It stays," and nothing more. No explanation. No apology. No defiance. Just a statement, calm and final, like a law of nature. That was what made people uneasy. She was not secretive. She did not hide. She did not act ashamed. Yet there was something firmly closed within her, a door no one could see but everyone could feel. In a place where stories were shared freely and lives overlapped like woven cloth, her silence stood apart. The elders noticed patterns. They noticed how she never let anyone touch her hair. Not to braid it. Not to trim it. Not even in kindness. When the wind tangled it, she untangled it herself. When it caught on thorns, she freed it with patience, never cutting, never tearing. They noticed how she washed it in the river at dawn, when no one else was there. How she spoke to no one while doing it. How she stayed longer than necessary, standing knee-deep in water, eyes closed, as if listening beneath the surface. Some began to say the hair was not just hair. They said it carried meaning, memory, debt. Children, however, saw something else. To them, she was the woman who listened. The one who never hurried them away. The one who understood quiet. They noticed how her hair sometimes brushed their shoulders when she leaned close, and how it felt warm, not heavy. They noticed how she flinched when someone else raised their voice, even in laughter. Once, a boy asked her why she never cut it. She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes softened, then darkened, like clouds passing over still water. "Because some things," she said gently, "are not meant to be shortened." That was all. The boy ran off, unsatisfied but not afraid. The adults who overheard it were not so calm. From that day on, the questions grew sharper. Why would a woman choose inconvenience over custom? Why carry such a burden openly? Why refuse what every other woman accepted without question? And beneath those questions lay a deeper one no one dared to speak. What would happen if her hair were cut? No one had tried. Not yet. But eyes followed her more closely now. Not with hatred, not with cruelty, but with an attention that felt like a hand hovering just above a flame. She remained the same. Fine. Quiet. Unyielding. And as her hair continued to grow, so did the feeling that it was not growing alone. It began with whispers. Not loud enough to be called gossip. Not sharp enough to be called accusation. Just soft, careful words passed between women while grinding grain, between men resting in the shade after long hours in the fields. Her name slipped into conversations and out again, leaving a faint unease behind. "Have you noticed how long it is now?" Longer than before. Longer than it should be. No one said this with anger. They said it with uncertainty. In a village guided by rhythms and rituals, anything that refused to change felt dangerous. The elders spoke among themselves beneath the acacia tree. They did not call her there. They spoke as if discussing weather or harvests, but their eyes followed her path whenever she passed nearby. One elder, the oldest among them, reminded the others that hair carried meaning. It marked grief. It marked rebirth. It marked obedience to the cycles that held the world together. "And hers marks nothing," he said quietly. That was the first time someone suggested her hair was a refusal. Soon, small interpretations began to grow around it. Some believed she was holding on to a past she should have released. Others said she was protecting herself from something unseen. A few whispered that her hair was an offering, unfinished, deliberately withheld. Each theory brought comfort to those who believed it, and discomfort to those who did not. Still, she said nothing. She continued her days as before, moving through the village like a shadow that caused no harm but refused to disappear. When asked directly if her hair carried meaning, she would only answer, "It carries what it must." That answer satisfied no one. Children were gently discouraged from sitting too close to her now. Not forbidden, just guided away. A hand on the shoulder. A quiet call from across the yard. Mothers told themselves it was caution, not fear. But fear has a way of dressing itself in reason. One afternoon, during a communal meal, her hair brushed the edge of a shared bowl as she reached for food. The movement was small, accidental. Still, the conversation stopped. Someone cleared their throat. Another pushed the bowl slightly away. She noticed. Of course she did. She withdrew her hand, not in shame, but awareness. She stood, nodded politely, and stepped back from the group. No one stopped her. No one apologized. From that day on, she ate alone. The strangeness did not erupt. It seeped. Goats refused to pass too close to her door. Or so people said. A pot cracked in a house she had just left. A child cried after dreaming of tangled roots pulling at their feet. Each event, harmless on its own, found its way back to her hair. Meaning gathered around it like smoke. One night, during a village ceremony, a woman stumbled while dancing and fell. Laughter followed, light and brief. But someone whispered, "She passed near the long-haired one today." The words landed heavier than they should have. That was when suspicion took shape. Not as hatred, not as cruelty, but as a question that could no longer be ignored. What if her hair was drawing something toward the village? What if it was anchoring something that should have moved on? The elders debated whether to speak to her again. Some argued she had done nothing wrong. Others insisted that difference itself was a warning. "She refuses to explain," one said. "She refuses to change," said another. "And what refuses to change," the oldest elder replied, "eventually forces change upon others." Meanwhile, she continued to walk the same paths, unaware, or perhaps fully aware, of the shift around her. Her eyes met fewer gazes now. Her greetings were answered more slowly. Yet her calm never cracked. And that, more than anything, unsettled them. Because if she was afraid, they could understand her. But she wasn't. And as the village's curiosity hardened into suspicion, one unspoken thought began to spread from house to house, heart to heart. If her hair truly held something dangerous, was it kinder to ask her to cut it, or crueler not to? By the time the rains arrived, her hair had become impossible to ignore. It no longer moved like something light. When she walked, it dragged softly along the earth, collecting dust, twigs, and the faint scent of rain-soaked soil. Some swore it left marks behind, thin lines in the dirt that faded only after many footsteps crossed them. Others claimed the ground beneath her feet felt warmer, as if something beneath the surface stirred when she passed. She did not seem to notice. Or if she did, she gave no sign. The first true incident happened on a market day. The village was crowded, louder than usual, filled with traders from nearby settlements. Voices overlapped, animals bleated, metal rang as goods exchanged hands. In the middle of it all, she stood quietly, waiting for her turn at a grain stall. A trader, new to the village, unaware of its unspoken tensions, laughed when he saw her hair. "Why do you carry so much?" he joked, reaching out as if to lift it. Before his fingers touched a single strand, the laughter around them died. The air shifted. Not dramatically. Not violently. Just enough for everyone to feel it. The trader froze, his smile fading. He withdrew his hand slowly, confused by his own hesitation. He later said he felt a sudden heaviness in his chest, like grief without a memory. He left the market early and did not return. The story spread by nightfall. From then on, the hair was no longer just strange. It was heavy with implication. Some villagers began leaving small offerings near her path, seeds, shells, bits of cloth, without knowing why. Others crossed to the opposite side of the road when they saw her coming. The children were no longer allowed near her at all. Still, she remained unchanged. She did not accept the offerings. She did not protest the avoidance. When greeted, she answered. When ignored, she bowed her head and moved on. But signs continued to gather around her. The dogs refused to sleep near her house. Birds perched on her roof but never sang. After heavy rain, while other homes dried quickly, the ground around her doorway remained damp long into the afternoon. The elders could no longer pretend nothing was happening. They called her before them at last. She came willingly, her hair wrapped loosely over one shoulder, her hands empty. Stood before the circle of elders, patient, respectful. No fear in her eyes. One elder asked her directly, "Why will you not cut it?" The air felt tight. Everyone leaned forward. She paused, only for a moment. "Because it is not mine alone," she said. That answer landed like a stone dropped into deep water. "What does that mean?" another elder pressed. She shook her head gently. "It means what it means." Frustration rippled through the circle. They asked if her hair carried a vow, a spirit, a memory that bound her. They asked if it threatened the village. They asked if cutting it would bring harm. She answered none of it. "I will not cut it," she said again. Come. Final. That night, the village changed. Not suddenly, but decisively. Someone painted a warning symbol on the ground near her home. Another muttered that she was challenging the balance. A third suggested that balance, once challenged, demanded correction. Fear sharpened into resolve. If she would not choose the village, then the village would choose itself. Rumors spread that cutting her hair might release whatever she was holding back. Others claimed it would destroy her. Both possibilities frightened people equally. And in fear, compassion weakens. She sensed it. For the first time, her steps slowed. Her shoulders curved slightly forward, as if bearing more than weight. She spent longer by the river now, standing in silence, fingers pressed to her scalp, eyes closed. As if listening to something that was growing restless. As if time was running out. Because the village had begun to believe that her hair was no longer just a mystery, it was a threat. And threats, in the end, are not allowed to remain uncut. The decision was never announced. It did not need to be. It moved through the village the way cold moves through stone, quiet, inevitable, impossible to stop once it begins. People spoke in careful fragments, glances held a little longer, voices dropped whenever she passed. The question was no longer if something should be done, but when. Tradition was called upon for support. An elder reminded the others that hair, when left uncut too long, could bind a person to sorrow. Another said imbalance, once tolerated, always demanded payment. They spoke of protection, of responsibility, of the duty to act before harm arrived. Each word was wrapped in reason. None of it sounded cruel. And that made it more dangerous. She felt the pressure before anyone touched her. Hands no longer reached out to greet her. Paths narrowed. Doors closed earlier in the evenings. When she walked through the village, conversations stopped, not out of respect, but restraint. Still, she did not run. She did not hide. She continued her routines as if steadiness alone might hold the world in place. She fetched water. She gathered herbs. She swept the ground before her door every morning, though fewer footprints passed by now. At night, however, she slept less. Those who lived nearby heard her murmuring softly, not words exactly, but sounds shaped like prayers or apologies. Sometimes her fingers tangled tightly in her hair, gripping it as if afraid it might slip away on its own. The elders finally came to her house at dusk. Not with weapons. Not with anger. With concern. They sat outside her doorway, refusing to enter without invitation. One spoke gently, telling her the village was afraid. Another said fear, when ignored, grows teeth. They told her they wished to help her, to help everyone. "There is still time," one elder said carefully. "If you cut it yourself, the village will stand with you." She listened in silence. The wind stirred her hair, lifting it slightly, as if it, too, were listening. "I cannot," she said at last. The simplicity of the answer broke something. A younger man, standing behind the elders, stepped forward. His voice trembled, not with anger, but desperation. "Then what are we supposed to do?" She met his eyes. For the first time, pain showed on her face. Deep, unhidden. "You are supposed to live," she said softly. That was not enough. By morning, word had spread that if she would not act, the village might have to. Not out of punishment, out of necessity. Cutting her hair was spoken of as a cleansing, a release, a return to balance. No one said what would happen to her afterward. That silence spoke volumes. She noticed the sharpening of resolve around her like a tightening rope. She noticed the way hands brushed against knives while talking. She noticed the way her house was watched now, not constantly, but deliberately. Still, she remained. The night before the chosen day, she went to the river one last time. The moon reflected long, pale lines across the water. She knelt at the edge, letting her hair fall forward, touching the surface. Her reflection tangled with it, face and hair becoming one dark shape. For a long time, she did not move. When she finally spoke, her voice barely carried above the water. "Not yet," she whispered. "Please." No one heard her. At dawn, the elders gathered the village. She was brought to the center, not dragged, not forced, but guided by hands that shook with uncertainty. A blade lay wrapped in cloth nearby, clean and waiting. She stood still. Her hair rested against the earth like a living thing holding its breath. The village waited for her to beg. She did not. She closed her eyes instead. And in that silence, just before the blade could be lifted, something shifted, subtle, unseen, but unmistakable. As if the moment they feared most had already arrived. The silence stretched longer than anyone expected. No one spoke. No one moved. The blade lay where it was, wrapped in cloth, untouched, but no longer forgotten. The air felt thick, pressing down on chests, making breaths shallow. Even the birds seemed to sense it. They perched along rooftops and trees, watching without sound. She stood in the center of the clearing, eyes closed, her hair spread across the earth like dark roots seeking something beneath the surface. An elder stepped forward. His voice, when he spoke, was no longer calm. It trembled under the weight of what had been set in motion. "If you will not speak now," he said, "then you leave us no choice." Still, she did not open her eyes. Instead, she placed both hands gently on her hair, as if calming a restless child. That small gesture fractured the crowd. Someone sobbed quietly. Another turned away, unable to watch. A woman whispered that this had gone too far. A man whispered back that it had already gone too far long ago. The elder reached for the cloth. And then she spoke. "Wait." One word. Soft. Broken. Her eyes opened. For the first time since anyone could remember, she looked afraid, not for herself, but for them. "I never meant for you to carry this," she said, her voice uneven. "It was never meant to touch you." The words confused them, angered some, moved others. "What is it?" someone shouted. "What are you hiding in that hair?" She swallowed. Her fingers tightened, and the ground beneath her feet shuddered, not violently, not enough to throw anyone off balance, but enough to be felt. A low, distant vibration, like thunder far underground. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Fear, now fully awake, surged forward. "She did this," someone cried. "Cut it now," another yelled. Hands grabbed the cloth. The blade was exposed to the sun, flashing once, sharply. The moment tipped toward chaos. She dropped to her knees. The movement was sudden, shocking, not a collapse, but a choice. Her hair spilled forward completely now, covering her body, touching the soil, spreading outward. "Please," she said, no longer calm. "If you cut it now, you will lose what you are trying to protect." That sentence split the village in two. Half heard it as a threat. Half heard it as a warning. The elders hesitated, trapped between duty and doubt. Tradition screamed for action. Instinct begged for pause. The ground vibrated again. Stronger this time. Dust lifted. A pot toppled. A child cried out. And then, silence. Absolute. In that stillness, something became clear. This was no longer about hair. It was about containment. About holding something together that wanted, desperately, to break free. The oldest elder looked at her with new eyes. "You are not protecting yourself," he said slowly. "You are protecting us." Tears welled in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "And I am tired." That confession landed harder than any tremor. The blade slipped from someone's hand and fell to the ground, useless. The village stood suspended in that moment, understanding hovering just out of reach, like a word on the tip of the tongue. She bowed her head. "If you cut it," she said quietly, "it will end my watching." No one asked what would begin. They did not need to, because the earth beneath them was already listening. And for the first time, the village understood that the true breaking point was not her silence. It was the moment they decided whether to believe her, or finish what fear had started. The oldest elder raised his hand. Slowly, carefully, the way one reaches for something fragile. The village stilled. "Tell us," he said, not as a command this time, but a plea. "Tell us what you have been carrying." She inhaled deeply, as if drawing strength from the ground itself. Her hands rested in her hair, fingers woven through it like roots. When she spoke, her voice was low, steady again, but heavy with truth. "Long before I came here," she began, "this land was not quiet." The elders listened. No one interrupted. "There was a fracture beneath the earth," she said. "A place where grief, anger, and unfinished sorrow gathered. Not one spirit. Many. Bound together by loss. They did not rise, but they did not sleep." She lifted her head. "They fed on remembrance." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "In my mother's time," she continued, "the elders of her village learned how to hold them. Not with chains. Not with force. But with patience. With living weight." She touched her hair. "Hair grows. It remembers. It binds." Understanding moved through the village like a slow dawn. "My mother took the watching first," she said. "She let her hair grow, year after year, carrying the weight of what lay beneath. When she grew weak, she passed it to me." Someone whispered, "Passed what?" "The vow," she answered. "And the burden." Tears slid down her face now, unhidden. "When I came of age, she cut her hair, not to release it, but to transfer it. The binding moved from her to me. That was the last day I saw her standing." A sharp breath was drawn from the crowd. "I left my village so the binding would not harm them," she said. "I came here because this land was quiet enough to hold it. Because your village sat at the edge of the fracture, not directly above it." The ground felt suddenly closer. Heavier. "My hair grew because it had to," she said. "Each year, it wrapped the grief tighter. Each season, it pressed it down. I stayed silent because speaking of it feeds it. Fear feeds it. Attention feeds it." She looked at the blade on the ground. And cutting it would have undone everything. The truth settled, undeniable. All the small signs. The heaviness. The warmth beneath her steps. The way animals sensed what people could not. "It is not evil," she said softly. "It is pain without a voice. And pain, when released all at once, destroys." The oldest elder lowered his head. "You have been suffering for us," he said. She shook her head. "I have been holding," she corrected. "Suffering is what happens when holding is done alone." Silence filled the clearing, not fearful now, but reverent. The villagers saw her differently. Not as strange. Not as dangerous. But as a living barrier. A woman who carried generations of grief so others could sleep peacefully. "I am tired," she repeated. "Not because of the weight, but because I was never meant to carry it forever." Hope flickered. "Then what must be done?" someone asked. She closed her eyes. "The binding must be shared," she said. "Not cut. Not broken. Shared." The village understood then. This was never about her refusing tradition. It was about her carrying one alone. And in that moment, as the earth lay quiet beneath them, they realized the truth that left them speechless. She never cut her hair, because she was holding the village together, strand by strand, year by year, in silence. No one spoke for a long time. The blade remained on the ground, forgotten. The elders stayed seated, their authority suddenly small beside the weight of what they had just learned. The villagers stood in quiet disbelief, not because the truth was hard to understand, but because it was impossible to forget. All this time, they had been afraid of the wrong thing. She was still kneeling when the oldest elder finally rose and stepped toward her. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered himself to the ground in front of her, resting his forehead against the earth. In that moment, the village followed. Men, women, elders. One by one, they knelt, not in fear, not in worship, but in recognition. Recognition of a sacrifice they had mistaken for defiance. Of a silence they had punished instead of honored. "You were never the danger," the elder said quietly. "You were the shield." Her shoulders trembled. For the first time since she arrived in the village, she wept openly, not loud, not broken, but deep. The kind of crying that comes when a burden finally finds a place to rest. They did not ask her to cut her hair. Instead, they brought water, oil, clean cloth. Women approached her gently, asking permission with their eyes before touching her hair for the first time. She nodded. Hands moved carefully, respectfully, washing the dust from strands that had carried years of grief. Others gathered near, listening as the elders spoke of a new vow, not for one woman, but for many. They would learn to hold together. They would take turns keeping watch. Not by growing hair endlessly, but by honoring the memory, by tending the land with awareness, by speaking grief instead of burying it. The binding would no longer be silent. At sunset, she stood again. Her hair was still long, still heavy, but it no longer lay like a sentence passed in solitude. It rested like a shared story, known now, seen now. Children returned to her side. One took her hand. Another leaned against her leg. She smiled at them, tired but lighter than she had ever been. In the days that followed, the village changed. Not dramatically, not magically, but meaningfully. People listened more. They spoke softer. They noticed the land, the cracks in themselves, the unspoken pain in others. When someone grieved, they did not rush them forward. When someone carried too much, they stepped in. And her hair? It stopped dragging along the ground, not because it was cut, but because she no longer walked alone. Years later, travelers would pass through the village and hear the story. Some would ask why the woman never cut her hair. Others would ask why the village treated her with such quiet reverence. The elders would answer simply, "Because once, she held what would have broken us." And the children, now grown, would add, "She taught us that love doesn't always speak. Sometimes it grows. Sometimes it carries weight. And sometimes it waits to be understood." The woman still lived at the edge of the village. Still kind. Still quiet. But no longer unseen. And when the wind moved through her hair, it no longer felt like a warning, it felt like remembrance. A reminder that the things we fear most are often the things that have been protecting us all along.